Well, Nigel Arnell is a Professor of Climate Change Science at the University of Reading. Welcome to the programme, Professor. So, as we've been reporting, record temperatures in many parts of the world at the moment. Can you pinpoint why?
Well, it's entirely down to the increasing concentration of greenhouses caused by the burning of fossil fuels. Over the last 30 years or so, the global average temperature is about 1 degree higher than we saw in the middle of the 19th century. And in Reading, it's about 1 degree higher than it was just 30 years ago. So the temperatures are increasing, and the report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published last year was really hard-hitting. It said it was unequivocal that the increase in temperature was due to the human emissions of greenhouse gases through the burning of fossil fuels. So it's entirely down to that.
Many parts of the world, including the UK, are just not set up to deal with these temperatures. How's the heat changing our everyday lives?
Well, in most places, they're set up to to cope with the conditions that they're used to, and that's inevitably going to be the case. Nowhere is going to be completely safe against any weather extreme. But what we're seeing is an increased number of extremes, and what's happening in practice is that I think people's healths are being affected, people's livelihoods are being affected, our ability to work is affected, but perhaps more importantly and more widespread, the services that we rely on is being adversely affected. Your correspondent earlier on was talking about problems in the roads, in the railways. We know our health service is expecting to deal with a larger number of people with heat-related conditions at the moment, whilst working in buildings that are not designed to work well in these sorts of temperatures. So there are lots of different dimensions of our lives that are being affected at the moment by the heat waves, and will continue to do so because we will continue to get more heat waves like this.
And how are governments reacting to this? Are they adapting their policies to deal with these kind of temperatures?
Well, there are two ways, effectively, that we can deal with climate change. One is to try and reduce emissions over the long term. That's not going to help this year or next year or in the next few years, although the sooner we reduce emissions, the better. In my view, progress on reducing emissions has stalled since the COP26 conference last year. Hopefully, the sort of events we're seeing this year will lead to a redoubling of effort to try and reduce emissions. But that's a long-term solution to the problem. The sooner we start, the better. Increasingly, governments are recognising, and organisations are recognising, that we need to adapt to change conditions. What our infrastructure is designed to is now out of date. The temperatures are higher, the conditions are quite different, and they're going to change even more over the future in the next few decades. So there's quite a big increase in interest in governments and organisations in many countries, including the UK, in working out how best to adapt to climate change. There are a number of complications and problems with this. It's relatively straightforward to try and adapt things that we're building now. There are some technical challenges, but it's relatively straightforward. It's much more difficult to adapt things that already exist, like our rail network, like our hospitals, and so on. But the biggest challenge is possibly the responsibilities are spread across a load of different organisations and departments. It's not as if there's one organisation that says this is what needs to be done. It's a governance problem as well as a technical problem about how we adapt and alter our infrastructure and our services.
And what about our own behaviour? We also heard from our correspondent that, particularly here in the UK, we don't really know how to behave when the temperatures are as hot as they are now. Do you think we need to change our own behaviour?
Well, that's a really tricky one, because at the moment we're in quite an extreme event. We're seen probably as a bit of a one-off. And I think your correspondent early on pointed out that we tend to see hot weather as being something like a nice thing. Quite often when we see hot weather news stories, they're illustrated by people eating an ice cream or something. Rarely do you see, obviously, people suffering. But I don't think we recognise that extreme heat like this is potentially really, really very damaging to our health and our livelihoods. And I think once we've gone through this event, people will remember that, OK, we may want to do things slightly differently next time there's a heat wave. And we may have different expectations of our services and our infrastructure. And what we seek to do when we seek to do things, what time of day we work, what time of day we travel, and so on. So I think there will be some changes, but I think that will emerge from people's behaviour rather than being sort of imposed top down, if you see what I mean. But I think we will see some behavioural change.
OK, Professor Nigel Arnell from the University of Reading, thank you very much indeed for talking to us today.
Thank you.